topic is Hashivas of Talmud Torah. Let's start with what Talmud Torah is not. We normally think that let me catch my breath for a second. We would think that the main purpose of Talmud Torah is to know how to do business. If you don't learn, you can't do it. And most certainly, one of the purposes of learning Torah is lilmod al manas lasos, to learn in order to observe what you're learning. However, the Beis Halevi says that mistake was a deadly mistake that Klal Yisrael made that eventually led to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Chazal say that the reason that Eretz Yisrael was lost and we went into Golus is al ozva mes Torah si, and Chazal say shelo berchu ba Torah tchil. They didn't make a bracha before they learned Torah. The Beis Halevi explains they assumed that Talmud Torah was merely a means to be able to learn to what to do. The halacha is that you make a bracha on a gemar mitzvah. You make a bracha when you sit in the sukkah on Sukkot. You don't make a bracha when you build a sukkah, because building a sukkah is only a hechsher mitzvah. The mitzvah is sitting in the sukkah. So you don't make a bracha on a hechsher mitzvah, you only make a bracha on the mitzvah itself. They assumed that learning Torah is a hechsher mitzvah. It's a preparation for doing it. And therefore you don't make a bracha on Torah itself. But that's not true. Torah itself is a value to itself. Avada, you have to observe what you learned. But there's more to Torah than just learning in order to observe. Torah is a mitzvah even if there's something that you can't observe at all. There are parts of the Torah that can never be mekuyim. Then soru mora, the Gemara says, l'hoyev v'lo nivra, but drosh v'kabel schar. There's still an inyan to learn Torah even in those areas that you'll never have anything lamaisa from it. That's what we want to speak about in the beginning. Now, what are those milas of Torah? What's a mila of learning Torah? And even though Chazal say, Gedol Torah shemivia, Gedol Talmud shemivia lidei ma'isa. The Torah learning is great because it brings you lidei ma'isa, but on the surface doesn't make sense because the goal is always greater than the means. So if the only thing about Talmud Torah would be that it's a means to be able to do, then how could learning be greater than doing? If the whole purpose of the learning is to do. The simple idea is that there's another added aspect of learning Torah that's intrinsic to itself. There's an intrinsic value to learn Torah. In addition to that, Torah brings you lidei ma'isa. So it has two milas. It has an intrinsic mila and it brings you lidei ma'isa, so it's greater than the ma'isa itself. And I was thinking to explain with that a very difficult Rambam. The Rambam starts Hilchos Talmud Torah, Noshim, Avodim, Ketanim, Rapotim, Talmud Torah. And then he goes to describe what Talmud Torah is. Very difficult. The Rambam in other places first tells me who's responsible, what it is. Then he tells me, and by the way, children and women and slaves are potter. Why did the Rambam start the halachas of Talmud Torah with Noshim, Avodim, Ketanim, Turim, Talmud Torah? I think it's to make this statement. Because women and slaves for sure have mitzvahs they have to do. Children also. There's a shita that holds that a child is chayiv in chinuch, right? The chiyuv is on the child. So the Rambam here is making it clear that the purpose of learning Torah is not in order to observe mitzvahs. Because if it would, then why should women be potter? They should be chayiv to learn the mitzvahs. They are chayiv, but not on Talmud Torah. They're chayiv because of their mitzvahs. Therefore, the Rambam makes a statement at the beginning of Hilchos Talmud Torah. Don't think that learning Torah is just in order to be able to makayim mitzvahs. Because Noshim, Avodim, and Ketanim are potter from Talmud Torah, even though they're chayiv in mitzvahs. So it must be something more intrinsic to learning Torah. So what is it? Start with the first mila of learning Torah is that in Lo Brisi Yomam V'Layla, Chuko Shamayim V'Oretz Osam. Chaim Volozhin explains, It's not that if Klal Yisrael had not accepted the Torah, then the world would have reverted to Tohu Vavohu. But every single second that the world exists, the energy source for the existence of the world is Talmud Torah. And if for 1 second there would be no Talmud Torah anywhere in the world couldn't exist. I once said this over at my table on Shavuos. One of my daughters is about 9 years old, and she says, now I understand what we learned in geography. That when it's dark on one side of the world, it's light on the other side, and vice versa. She said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it like that probably, so there'd always be people up learning Torah. Because if it would be night all over at the same time, then there'd be at least one time when nobody would be learning Torah and the world couldn't exist. This way, people learn in shifts. When it's daytime here, it's nighttime there, and so on. That explains also another Maimer Chazal. Gedola Talmud Torah Yoser Mihatzolas Nefashos. Learning Torah is greater than saving lives. That does not mean that if you're sitting by the riverbank and you hear somebody screaming, help, I'm drowning, save me, and you're learning, that you should say, well, I'm sorry, I'm learning now, and learning Torah is greater than saving lives. So if you can tread water till Bein Hasdarim or Bein Hazmanim, I'll be happy to save you, but right now I'm learning. That's not what it means. You close the Gemara and you go and save the life. What it means is, even though the Rebbeinu Shalom wants you at that moment to save a life, it's not because saving lives is greater than Talmud Torah. Pesach night, comes time to eat matzah, and you're learning, you have to stop learning to eat matzah. No one would ever think that the mitzvah of eating matzah is greater than the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah connected to it. Except that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do the lesser thing. If you can't do it to somebody else, and it has a set time, then the Rebbeinu Shalom said, I want you to do this too, but not because it's greater, because that's what you have to do. You have to save a life, but not because saving lives is greater than Talmud Torah. How do you understand that? But according to this, that if every second you learn Torah, you are keeping the world going. So learning Torah keeps the entire world going. Saving a life, how many lives could you save? You save 1,000,000 lives, not the whole universe. So learning Torah is much greater even than saving a finite amount of lives. And that's why Rav Aaron Kotler says, we say a whole list of chasodim in the morning, right? Kibud Ava'im and Gemilas Chasodim and Hachnosas Kala and Hachnosas Orchim and Bikur Cholim and Talmud Torah Keneged Kula. The Chorus apples and oranges. Right? What in the world is Talmud Torah? Do a Gemilas Chesed. It's not, this is greater than them. It's not the same thing. But according to this, Talmud Torah is the greatest chesed you could possibly do. Because by learning Torah, you're keeping the entire world going. And it's not just that if somebody's learning Torah, so the world will exist. But the more Torah learning, in quantity, and not only that, but the greater quality of Talmud Torah, the more a person learns Torah in depth, the more kiyum the world has, the more substance the world has, the more safe the world is. So that is the first mile of Talmud Torah, is that Talmud Torah itself is the energy source for the entire world. And that's why Chazal say, Vitra HaKadosh Baruch Hu Agil Yarayish V'Chazdom Avodah Zarah. These are 3 devastating sins. But God could overlook them. But Lo Vitra Al Bittul Torah. Because Bittul Torah is taking away the energy source for the entire world. It's more devastating than the devastating effects of Gil Yarayish V'Chazdom Avodah Zarah. It doesn't look like that. You're sitting here with a bunch of Sfarim with a Gemara. There's so many people out there that are seeming to do much more substantive things. There's architects building big bridges and big buildings, and people who are discovering cures for diseases, right? People in finance or whatever, running the economy of the world. Looks much more impressive than you sitting here with a Gemara open in front of you. Chavetz Chaim gives a mashal. He says there was once a very wealthy man who wanted to have built for him the most luxurious yacht that ever existed. So he hired an architect and he hired a builder, and he told them, I want you to build me the most luxurious yacht that ever existed. But I'm telling you now that when it's finished, I'm going to inspect it. And if there's anything plain and ordinary in that boat, I'm not going to pay you a penny. Everything has to be luxurious. So they built him this beautiful yacht. they came to inspect it. So they took him to the state rooms, and they saw everything was wall-to-wall plush carpeting. The bathroom fixtures were solid gold. Everything was luxurious. Took him to the dining room, the ballrooms, beautiful, luxurious. Finally, they took him down beneath, and he sees a room with a plain, ordinary doorknob, and it looks like smoke coming out from under the door. He says, I have a suspicion that there's something in that room that is not luxurious. I want the door opened immediately. They opened the door. Sure enough, there's no carpeting on the floor. It's all sooty and dirty. He said, look, I'm giving you 24 hours to get this room out of my boat, or I don't pay you a penny. So they took the engine room out of the boat, and the whole boat sank. The engine room may not look as luxurious and as illustrious, right, and may not be as luxurious as the rest of the boat, but that's what keeps the boat going. So too, it may not look so impressive that you're sitting here with a Gemara, but all the other things that people are doing that may look very impressive, they couldn't do any of that unless you're sitting here learning Gemara, because the world wouldn't have the ability to exist. Another thing the Chafetz Chaim said, he once had a meeting in Rav, in Beis Medrash, in Yeshiva, because they wanted to build a Jewish-run hospital in the area there after World War I, between World War I and World War II. There were a lot of Jewish sick people because of the conditions in Europe at that time, and the Goyish hospitals didn't take care of them well. So they wanted to build a Jewish-run hospital. So the Chafetz Chaim said, this is so important, I want people to know that it's important. I'm going to have a meeting for all of the Balabatim, the rich Balabatim who can donate for this hospital in the Beis Medrash in my yeshiva. They'll know it's an important thing. So they got together in the Beis Medrash. The Chafetz Chaim got up, made an impassioned plea for people to give money for this hospital. And he said, I want everybody to get up, one by one, and pledge a certain amount of beds for the hospital, each bed representing a certain amount of money. So each one got up, this one pledged 10 beds, 15 beds, 20 beds. Finally, the time came for the richest person there to make his pledge, and everybody's waiting with bated breath. How many beds is he going to give? He gets up, and he notices in the back of the Beis Medrash, there's an Avrech, poor Talmid Chacham sitting and learning. So to make a little joke, he said, I'll give 10 times as many beds as that guy in the back will give. So everybody laughed. The guy in the back probably couldn't give a pillowcase, let alone a bed. Chafetz Chaim got up, livid, angry, banged on his stender, and he said, you couldn't give 1,000 of what that man in the back could give. So everybody thought, wow, this guy's like, unknown millionaire. He said, I'll tell you what I mean. You could give, 100 beds, 1,000 beds to take care of the sick people in this area? That man with his Torah can see to it that there won't be any sick people in this area. With all your money in the world, you can't do that. So that is the first mile of Torah, aside from being able to learn how to do mitzvahs. You are keeping the world going. Every word of Torah you learn. And the deeper you learn, the more energy you give. The more gas you give to the world. The more time you spend, the more kiyum the world has. The more people there are that are learning, the more secure, the more safe, the more substantive the world is. Second, not only are you keeping the macrocosm, the big universe going, you're keeping the microcosm going too. Because your ability to live, especially eternal life, comes from Torah. Kol mi sheyesh bo or Torah mechayev. A person who has the light of Torah, the light of Torah study within him, that is what gives him eternal life. Chazal say that the eternal life of Olam Haba comes from Limud Torah. Ad kedei kach, but the Gemara says, and how do women have Olam Haba? How do women get Olam Haba? They don't have a mitzvah Talmud Torah. The Gemara says because they support their husbands and their children in learning Torah. So therefore they become partners in Limud Torah just like they're learning. But otherwise, you don't have Olam Haba, you don't have Tchias HaMesim. And the Shemaisha says, that's what the Mishnah means in Sanhedrin. One of the people who loses his chelik in Olam Haba is a person who says, Ein Tchias HaMesim min HaTorah. Rashi learns, he says, I believe in Tchias HaMesim, but I don't believe that it has a source in the Torah. Very difficult. Rashi, what difference if you believe in it? What difference does it make to have a source? It doesn't have a source. Shemaisa says it means something else. A person says, I believe in Tchias HaMesim, but I don't believe what causes it is learning Torah. I believe that other things cause it. Mitzvot, whatever, it makes Tchias HaMesim. Ain't Tchias HaMesim min HaTorah. Tchias HaMesim doesn't come from the Torah. A person like that loses faith in Him. Because there is no Mechaye Olam Nota V'Sochein. That's a brach we make on Birchas HaTorah. Where is that Chaye Olam? That eternal life, that is just like the life of the world is Torah, the life of every individual, the eternal life comes from Torah. We say that every day, except we think it's just poetic. It's not poetic, it's true. It means it literal. That is, you want to know where your life source is, not just the 120 years in this world. It keeps your heart beating or whatever. That's not real life. We're talking about eternal life. Eternal life's the source is Limud HaTorah. Next, mile. Torah brings perfection to the world. And Talmidei Chacham who learn Torah, Marvin Shalom Ba'olam. The Rambam says in the end of Hilchos Chanukah, based on the Gemara in Yevamos, Lo nitna Torah ela lahavi Shalom La'olam. As the pasuk says, Yorachecha darchei Noah, Echol mesimosecha Shalom. Shalom doesn't mean peace. Shalom doesn't mean hello, goodbye. Shalom means perfection. What brings perfection to this world, not only what fuels the existence of the world, what fuels the existence of every person eternally, but the perfection of the world, the perfection of every human being depends on Talmud Torah. Another mile of Torah. Torah connects you to the Rabbanu Shalom. Torah is God's mind. Kibiyachol, it's God's will. When you learn Torah, you are connecting to yourself to the Rabbanu Shalom's mind and His Ratzon, and that's what the Rabbanu Shalom is. The Rabbanu Shalom, it's impossible to cleave to the Rabbanu Shalom himself. He's beyond comprehension. So what can we cleave to? The Rabbanu Shalom's Das, the Rabbanu Shalom's Chochmah, the Rabbanu Shalom's Ratzon. When you learn Torah, you're learning Kibiyachol with the Rabbanu Shalom. He's teaching you. He's speaking to you from the Torah. Every time you learn a Tosas, every time you learn a piece of Gemara, every time you learn a Pasuk Chumash, the Rabbanu Shalom speaking to you. In fact, I think the Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos sometimes says, Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Omer Rabbi Yehuda Nossi. Because Rabbi Yehuda Nossi didn't say this on his own. He's telling you Torah Hashem. So when you learn Torah, whether it's Torah Shebachsav or Torah Shebal Peh, you're learning Dvar Hashem, and the Rabbanu Shalom is speaking to you. And if the Rabbanu Shalom is speaking to you, then you have a chavrusa with him, great chavrusa. If you have another chavrusa, so the Rabbanu Shalom is the third partner in that chavrusa. That's why it says, Eino Dome, Shona Pirko Mea Pa'amim. There's no comparison of a person who learns something 100 times. Shona Pirko Mea Pa'amim Ve'echad. Simple meaning, somebody who learns it 101 times. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say, Eino Dome, Shona Pirko Mea Pa'amim, Shona Pirko Mea Ve'echad Pa'amim. It says Mea Pa'amim Ve'echad. The Ve'echad, they say, means together with the Rabbanu Shalom. You learn 100 times, but you don't realize that you're learning with Rabbanu Shalom. He's speaking to you from the sefer that you're learning, right? And your learning is very, very much different than when you understand you're learning Mea Pa'amim, but Ve'echad, you're learning together with the Echad HaMiyuchad, you're learning together with the Rabbanu Shalom. Therefore, the Rambam says, how do you reach Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem? Right? How does a person become an Oev Hashem and Yiras Hashem? It says, Yohavdas Hashem Elokecha, how? V'hoyu hadvorim ha'elu. When you learn Torah, right, you get closer and closer to the Rabbanu Shalom. You get to see His wisdom. Just as much as when a person fathoms creation and nature, he sees the wisdom of the Rabbanu Shalom. That should bring him to a tremendous love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and a tremendous awe. The same way when you learn Torah. When you have the awe and you understand how deep Torah is, how much there is. There's svarim written about one small halacha big Sfarim. There's no end to Torah. Not in Kamus and not in Eichus. There's always deeper and deeper and deeper. And when you come with a hispilus from a Svara in Torah, you see the tremendous depth and breadth of the knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Ratzon Hashem. It has the same effect on you as when you see the Grand Canyon, when you see the flows of the Ribono Shel Olam in nature. Same thing you see from sitting and learning a piece of Gemara. So that is another milah of Torah. It connects you to the Ribono Shel Olam. The corollary of that is Torah's mechaven daito l'das hamon. Torah makes you think like God. It programs and conditions you to have the thought process. When you learn a piece of Gemara, especially Gemara, when you learn a piece of Gemara, it programs your mind to think like the Ribono Shel Olam, because Torah Shebaal Peh is God's thought process. So you get into the habit of thinking and seeing things like the Ribono Shel Olam sees them. What's the mile of that? That's called Das Torah. Person who is immersed in Torah, and the more you're immersed, a little bit, you have a little Das Torah. A lot, you have a lot of Das Torah. Gedolei Yisrael, who are totally immersed in Torah from the time that they were young, and to the exclusion of everything else. So their mind is programmed to think like the Ribono Shel Olam. That's what Torah is. So when you go and ask them a question about something, they can't look up in the Gemara. They can't find a place where your advice that they're giving you has a source. So what is their opinion better than your opinion? But their opinion is based on God's thought process. And when they think and when they see an issue, they assess it according to what they've been programmed to think, how the Ribono Shel Olam thinks. So you're getting what God would say in your specific situation. That's called Das Torah. The more you learn Torah, the more your mind becomes programmed, conditioned to think like that. And then you can see issues in life that you can't find a source for specifically anywhere. But at least that's how you think. That's how you see things. In that light, you'll be able to think like the Ribono Shel Olam thinks. That's another meaning of Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Tells the Rosh Hashiva, Reb Chaim Mordechai Katz, said what it means is the following. A person has to do mitzvahs. He has to do and function in this world. How does he know if he's functioning properly? You have a mitzvah kibbud av v'ein. Sometimes a mitzvah to listen to your parents. Sometimes a mitzvah not to listen to your parents. How do you know when? So Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. You have to assess every mitzvah you do. And for that matter, everything that you do. Opposite Talmud Torah. You have to see it through the lens of Talmud Torah. The more you learn, the more you're able to assess what you do. Is it a mitzvah? Is it an aveira? Is it something parad? How do you know? The only way you know is by assessing it l'umas Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Look through the prism. Look through the lens of Talmud Torah. And then you'll see things as God sees them. And you'll know if the mitzvah you're doing is really a mitzvah, and you'll know if the thing that you're doing in life is what God would want you to do, or what you want to do, and maybe it's not the Ratzon Hashem. Another milah of Talmud Torah. Barasi Yetzer Hara, Barasi Torah Tav. The Ribono Shel Olam created the Yetzer Hara, and he created an antidote, but it doesn't really mean an antidote, it means a spice. The Torah doesn't necessarily get rid of your Yetzer Hara, but it spices it up. It makes it tasty. It makes it that you can use it even for the good. That's what we're supposed to do. A person's not supposed to destroy his Yetzer Hara, but he's supposed to take that Yetzer Hara and use it for Avodas Hashem, channel it in the right direction. Now, how in the world can you take a Yetzer Hara, which is evil, and spice it up and turn it into something good? The only way is to Torah. The Ribono Shel Olam created both of them, and he said the only way, I created it, I know what it is. The only way you can combat your Yetzer Hara is to Talmud Torah. The Yetzer Hara gets you, the way to get away from it, Moshchei lebeis hamedrash. Open a Gemara, start learning, Yetzer Hara go away. So Torah, learning Torah, is a way to harness and be able to control your Yetzer Hara. Therefore, Chazal say, Halavai osi azov, Halavai, you forget about me. Don't observe my mitzvahs. But for Torasi shamaru, but you keep learning Torah, shahamor shabal matzul, eventually you'll come back. Because the Torah will drag you back to Avodas Hashem. Therefore, my Rosh Hashiva of Gifter Zatzal used to say that the most effective way of being Mekara people, some of you are interested in Kiruv, going into Kiruv. So there's a lot of gimmicks in Kiruv, how to be Mekara people. He says the best thing is not a gimmick. Sit down and learn a Pasuk Chumash with a person. Sit down and learn Mishnah, piece of Gemara. Because Amor Shabbat Matzah, Torah has the ability to bring people closer to Yiddishkeit. And if you don't see the results right away, doesn't mean it's not there. The Torah gets to the neshama, to the shoresh, to the root of a person, and in itself has the ability to bring a person closer. In addition to all of this, Torah makes you a new person. When you learn Torah, you're not the same person you were before you learned. You're a little bit different. The more you learn, the more different a person you are. It says, last week said, "Nefesh asher asum bechara," that these are the people that they taught Torah, Avraham Avinu and Sarah, and Nefesh asher asum. Chazal learned from that, "Malame ben chaveiro Torah keilu asho," like you made him, like you gave birth to him. We learned also from the fact that says Eila told us Moshe v'Aaron, and only mentions the children of Aaron, because Moshe taught them Torah as if he gave birth to them. The idea being somebody who has no one to teach you Torah, who was far from Torah, and you taught them Torah, you made that person into a good person. The Maharsha says a person's like an animal until he's a person who has Torah within him. It's a new person. It's like changing from an animal to a human being. Then there's people whose parents could teach them Torah, but not on the same level. So there it's Ki'ilu Yoldo. It's like you gave birth to that person. But it's even more than that. Even a person who has an Aaron HaKohen as a father, but Moshe adds something, a little bit, a little nuance different. It's like your children. So every little bit of Torah that a person learns makes him a different person, completely different person. And that's why Torah is able to enhance your midos. If you don't have midos tovos, the basics, you'll never have Torah. Name derech eretz ain't Torah. Derech eretz kodmo the Torah. But on the other hand, the main Torah ain't derech eretz. If you really want to enhance a person's midos, your own midos, then the way to do it is only through learning Torah. The more Torah you learn, the more enhancement of your midos, the more you can be a greater person, a greater mensch. And therefore Talmud Torah makes you into a different person by working on your midos. The whole Mesilas Yesharim, all the Mesilas Yesharim starts with Torah Meviah, Lidei Zehirus. First you have to have Talmud Torah. Then you can have Zehirus and Zrizus and all the other midos. But if you don't have Talmud Torah, then you'll never come to the essence, the enhancement of what midos really are. And lastly, Torah Taka brings you to be able to do mitzvahs. Torah Miviah Lidei Ma'aseh. But it doesn't mean simply that if you don't know halacha, you don't know the mitzvahs, you can't do them. That's simple. It means much more than that. Torah Miviah Lidei Ma'aseh means the more you learn, the deeper you learn, the more you have a breadth and depth of Torah learning, the different your mitzvah is. Imagine a person who never learned anything about tefillin, except somebody told him, look, these black boxes, you got to put on your arm, have kavanah l'shem mitzvah, anochas tefillin, you don't say the mitzvah. And somebody who learned through all the Gemaras and Menachos about tefillin, he understands all the halacha, all the raid, all the pilpul, right, all the yeshivish Torah about tefillin, and he's learned through all the zohars and all the tamei and mitzvah, what the idea philosophically and kabbalistically, what tefillin are all about. He knows how to put tefillin, and he knows how they're made back and forth. He knows all the parshas. He's learned all the mefarshei Torah and what's in the Arba parshas and the tefillin. Can you tell me that that person who puts on tefillin and the other person who puts on tefillin are doing the same mitzvah? They're kind of the same mitzvah, but isn't there a world of difference between the person who's Mekayim the mitzvah with a background of Talmud Torah and the person who's Mekayim the mitzvah knows nothing about it, except that it's a mitzvah and he doesn't? Both will get schar, but the mitzvah is a much more quality mitzvah, the more learning you have behind it. So when it says Torah is miviah l'idei ma'aseh, it doesn't only mean that it enables you to do it. It means that it enhances your ma'aseh too. And the more you learn, and the more you are a ben Torah, the more you're a Talmid Chacham, the more your mitzvahs are quality mitzvahs, because there's a lot more behind them than just do this or don't do this. In addition to that, the more you learn, the more clear Torah is and mitzvahs are. And the more clear something is to you, the more real it is. They always give the difference between somebody who believes something and knows it, and then you really know it, you feel it. In Tells, they used to give the following example. In America, I don't know if it's still like that, but when I was there 30 years ago, everywhere in America, if you go to a public park, they have park benches. They all are colored the same color green. Dark green. They must have had 1 million gallons of that paint that they reserved for park benches. So sometimes they renew the coat of paint on the benches. And then they put a sign, wet paint, so you don't sit on the bench and get your clothes full of that color green. What do people normally do when they see that sign on the bench? Touch the bench and look at their finger to see if it's not really wet paint. Why? Don't you believe the sign? You see the paint is glistening. Why do you have to touch it? The answer is there's a very big difference between what you know intellectually and what you really, really feel. What difference does it make? If you really, really believe that it's real to you, if you're willing to sacrifice, even sacrifice your life. If you believe it and it's not real, just something intellectual, then maybe you're not ready to sacrifice it. Right? There's all different levels of belief. How real it is to you. And Muna has to be as if you were there by Yetzias Mitzrayim and saw all those miracles, then you really, really feel the belief. That's how strong it has to be. Not just that you say you believe and you do, but it's just intellectual. The more Torah you learn, the more real your emunah becomes. The more you see the Rabbanon Shalom, the more you feel it. And the more you can feel them when you do a mitzvah. And the more real and clear the mitzvah is. That is another milah in learning Torah. Because Torah has so many facets. What we mention is only the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more each thing that I mentioned to go deeper and deeper. But in order to be able to have Torah, have all those milahs, you can't just sit down like you curl up with a novel and read some Torah. You have to be two things. You have to be omel b'Torah. You have to put in a tremendous amount of effort, and you have to be with simcha. You have to enjoy learning Torah. And they go together. Because the more a person realizes that Torah is something that is the joy of his life, all these miles, the more he's willing to put in effort. And the more you put in effort in something, the more dear it becomes to you, the more you enjoy it. The two things go together, and they work symbiotically, one with the other. They complement each other. And the purpose of that is that the Torah should become mamish, part of you. That's the milah. Not that you should possess Torah. That's the difference between Chochmah and Torah. It says if somebody tells you, Chochmah b'goyim tam. Somebody tells you the goyim have Chochmah, believe it. Torah b'goyim al tam. If somebody says Torah exists by the nations of the world, don't believe him. Impossible. Now on the surface, that doesn't make too much sense. Because either it means that a goy can't learn Torah. It's impossible, which is ridiculous. I'm sure that a nuclear physicist could open a art scroll chumash and make heads and tails of it. So, and not only that, there are goyim who learn Gemara. There's a goy, Danby, was a priest. He wrote a commentary on the Mishnah. It's not a bad commentary either. Priests learn Gemara. So
Goyim can learn Gemara. Elamai, they're not allowed to. So it means if somebody tells you that Goyim do things they're not allowed to do, don't believe it. And that's also ridiculous. Because Goyim do a lot of things they're not allowed to do. So what does it mean? I'll tell you, I think what I think it means, and it's very much how you get all these milas told. There was a professor of ethics at City College in New York in the 1940s. His name was Bertrand Russell. During that time of his life, Bertrand Russell was very unethical. He was a communist. He believed in free love, didn't believe in marriage. He was immoral, unethical. So the ethics committee of the college called him in, and they said, Bertrand Russell, we have a problem with you. You teach ethics in our institution, and you're not ethical. He said, what's the problem? He said, 20 years ago I taught geometry in a school in England. Not once did the ethics committee of that college call me in and say, Professor Russell, we have a problem with you. You teach geometry in our institution, and you're not a square, a circle, or a parallelogram. I don't have to be what I teach. I just have to teach it. I don't have to be a plane to teach geometry. I don't have to be ethical to teach ethics. That's Chokhmah. Chokhmah is something you possess. You can do what you want with it. It could make an impression on you, and it did on many very fine people who let their wisdom make an impression on them. But it didn't have to. You can be a nuclear physicist and be a bum. And the fact that you're a bum does not detract one bit from your Chokhmah, and your Chokhmah doesn't add one bit to your character. And that's what Goyim understand. But Torah can't be like that. Torah nimshalot ke'esh. Torah is like fire. Not eisho sarosha, not Torah sarosha. Fire makes an impression, and Torah has to make an impression. Either people who learn Torah, it doesn't seem to make an impression on them. The people learn Torah in Judaic studies in colleges, and they are totally unobservant. It's the opposite. Right? So Torah doesn't make an impression, but they learn Torah. You ever go to a chasna, somebody puts some liquid on his hat and puts it on fire, and he doesn't become, self-immolated like a Buddhist monk, right? But his hat lasts, he lasts, goes to the next chasna, does it again. It's called stage fire. It's a cold flame. It looks like fire, smells like fire, sounds like fire, but it's not real fire. It's just stage fire. How do I know it's not real fire? It doesn't burn anything. You can have something that looks like Torah, smells like Torah, sounds like Torah, but it's not real Torah. It's only Chokhmah, because it doesn't make an impression on the person who's learning. Then you know it's fake. Looks like Torah, it remains Chokhmah. That's why by a Chokhmah, a nuclear physicist, you make a bracha. Asher nosan mechachmaso lebasar v'dar. God gives the wisdom, no strings attached, do what you want with it, and you remain a flesh and blood person. But a Talmid Chacham will make a different bracha. Asher chalak mechachmaso li'leya. The Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't give it away. He apportions it out. There's conditions. And then he only gives it to people who fear it. Then you have Torah. So in order to make the Torah mamish part of you, and that's the goal. The Gemara says people are very foolish because they stand up for a Sefer Torah when it comes out of the Aron Kodesh. They don't stand up for a Talmid Chacham. The Sefer Torah in the Aron Kodesh is dead wood, dead parchment, dead ink, locked up in that box. Don't do anything for anybody a whole week. What's the purpose of that Torah? That people should learn it and become living Sefer Torah. So people stand up for the dead Sefer Torah, they don't stand up for the living Sefer Torah. It's foolishness. But that's the goal. The goal is that if you learn properly, and you put your concentration and your effort and your simcha, that becomes the ikr of your life. And even if you're not going to sit and learn Torah all day, you become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, a businessman, a garbage man, makes no difference what you do. That's what you do. That's your parnos. That's your occupation. That's not you. You are not a doctor. You are not a lawyer. You're a person who does doctrine, who does law. What are you? Depends what kind of Talmid Chacham that been told. Asay Torah kvar. If in your lives you make the Torah the ikr, and even if you only have an hour a day to learn, but that hour a day is the ikr of what you are, and the rest of the time you have to make a parnasa. You have other things to do, but that's only the peripheral. That's in order to make that you have that hour to learn and become a different person, and to create that life for yourself and the world and all the other things we mentioned. So then you'll become a living Sefer Torah. Some people are a little bigger Sefer Torah, some people are smaller Sefer Torah. But that's the goal of every Jew. So whatever you're going to be, whether you're going to be Toraso, Naso, you're going to sit and learn Torah your whole life, become a Rav, you become a Mechanech, Dayan, whatever it may be. Or you'll be a person, Mekayim Yofet Talmud Torah and Derech Eretz. You combine Torah with a worldly occupation. In either case, the Torah has to be the ikr. You could be learning Torah all day, and you take an hour break during the day, and you're looking forward to that all day. That's the ikr of your day, my hour break. Then you're not a person who's Torah Sokeh, even though you're learning 23 hours a day. But that's 1 hour that you free, that's the ikr. So, and you could be learning Torah 1 hour a day. That's the ikr of your life. And everything else you do is in order to enable that you can have that hour to learn, then Torah Sokeh. If you make the Torah keva, it doesn't mean just that you make it set, it means set in you. And you become a living sacred Torah. So that's how Talmud Torah has to be. The Rambam says that Tevilah, you go to a mikveh, you immerse yourself completely in the waters of the mikveh. The way that it works is that physical immersion is like being tovel b'nei hadas. It's like the immersion a person has when he immerses himself in Torah, and that immersion in Torah is mamad like immersing yourself in the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's how you become connected to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Therefore, Talmud Torah is tremendously important. This stage in your life, you have nothing else to do. You have nothing else. No worries, no parnasa worries. You don't have to support a family. You don't have children to worry about. You're b'nei chorin. That's never going to come again in your life. Mitzvah Hashem. You'll have children. You'll have a wife to worry about, and you'll have a parnasa to worry about. But at this point in your life, you're mamish free people. So take advantage. If you don't learn now, you'll have a kindness Torah me'oshem. So you'll be kind the only also. The opposite also. If you can do it now, you'll do it then too. So take advantage. These are the golden years of your life now. To be able to understand what it means to really immerse yourself in Talmud Torah and have all these milos. And then you'll be able to continue that even under more difficult circumstances for the rest of your life, to be a real Ben Torah. To be a person who is a Ben Torah. Not just a person who learns Torah. A person who has a kesher to Torah like a father and a son is something that never can be broken. Even after the father dies, he's still the father. That relationship never goes away. So become b'nei Torah by immersing yourselves in Torah, and that'll keep with you the rest of your life. And all these milas of Torah will come to a person who's an omel bat Torah, who has simcha, tremendous simcha from learning Torah. The more you do, tam ura'u, the more you taste, the more you do, the more you'll see Hatzlach. All of you should become real B'nai Torah no matter what you're going to do in this world. Become real B'nai Torah, and that's schus. The schus HaTorah, right? Yipnu Bagoy. When you learn Torah in Golos, then Ato HaKatz, and then the Rebbeinu Shalom said, Mashiach is going to come in the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu, the schus of Talmud Torah, you'll be the ones to help bring the Geula Shleima of Eretz Yom. Time for a few questions, please. Anybody?
It's open questions. If you wanted to ask about Torah, or you could ask about almost anything.
Yeah.
For people that are in a situation where they aren't learning Torah the entire day, besides for being kavur eating, being kavuring yourself learning Torah, do you have any other advice for learning Torah when you're not learning the whole day?
First of all, a person before he becomes a person who is Mekayim Yofet Talmud Torah in Derech Eretz. So he has to make sure that he chooses an occupation that he can be Talmud Torah in Derech Eretz, not where it's an exterior is Talmud Torah. So a person should look into what kind of profession, where he's going to live, right? What kind of atmosphere and environment he's going to put himself into, to make sure that he picks an occupation that will be compatible with wanting to be a Ben Torah, and not one that's going to constantly present him with conflict. That's the first thing. Second thing, once you have that, right, from the very start, what you do in the beginning, the ratios of everything is very important. Because how you plant a seed, and how you set the foundation makes a difference in how the whole building's going to be and how the plant's going to be. So if you say, well, later on, first I got to get settled in my profession, and then later on I'll get cabrusas or whatever, it's not going to work. From the very first day you start, you have to set up, even if it's a minor amount of time, but it's kabua, that you know that the Torah is the ikr of your day. If you start out like that, that's the foundation, then it's much easier to continue. Each thing then needs specific, how to work it out in your specific situation. That you have to have somebody who knows you and knows the situation, and where you know the situation, and then you can work out the details. Yeah.
To what extent should someone be most nefesh for Torah?
What extent should a person be most nefesh? Meaning what? Give me
Parnasa.
So there are klolim of mitzvahs. That's one kind of thing, like kibbutz avray. The halacha is that a mitzvah that someone else can do, or that you don't have to do now, and Talmud Torah takes precedence over that mitzvah. Something that you have to do, and it has to be done now, and the mitzvah takes precedence over Talmud Torah. That's a cloud that the Gemara says in white. When it comes to parnasa, so there it depends. A person who knows that if he doesn't earn a living and live a comfortable existence, that he's not going to be able to learn. His personality is to a degree where he needs that cushion of gashmis to be able to feel comfortable, right? So he gets two choices. He can work on himself where he's not so dependent and be moser nefesh for Talmud Torah. But if he knows that he can't do that, and it's just going to be futile, and therefore it'd be better for him to be able to learn Torah if he has also the cushion of a comfortable life, right? He's not fooling himself. Okay? Then he can utilize that comfortable life in order to enhance his Talmud Torah. Then he's the kind of person should be Yofa Talmud Torah in Derech Eretz. Right? If that applies to you or not, you really have to ask an aid, so you could fool yourself. When I was in Miami, most people had their own private pools. When I went to buy my second house in Miami, as my family was getting bigger, I said to my wife, let's look for a house with a pool. Because it'll be very enhancing for our Avodas Hashem if we have the comfort of a pool. We don't have to worry about, our children wanting to go mix swimming somewhere, right? We can invite people from the neighborhood so they don't have to go mix swimming. And it's very relaxing and comfortable, and it'll be enhancing of our Avodas Hashem. And for the few years I was in Miami with the pool, I convinced myself that this is really an enhancement of Avodas Hashem. Then we moved to Eretz Yisrael, and my house was smaller than the pool, and I had in Miami, and we only had a pool in Matityahu when it rained in the winter in my living room. And all of a sudden I discovered that you can be an Oved Hashem without a swimming pool. So sometimes you can fool yourself into thinking what you really need, right, in order to be able to function, and what you can do without. So therefore you have to ask advice from somebody who knows you, and somebody who can relate to your personality and what you need, but be objective and direct you. Taka, in your circumstance, it'd be better for you to go to work and have a living that you won't have to depend on nisim or whatever, than to sit and learn over. Or, in your circumstance, you don't really need that. And you can Mekayim Mamish Torah Naso, and you don't need that other thing, and you could work on yourself a little bit to be able to get that kind of attitude or whatever. That depends on the advice you get, objective advice from somebody who knows you or whatever. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So the Rav said that a lot of people, their mitos don't improve with Torah, so you know it's fake. So how do we gain this connection to Torah to make it real?
One word, learn.
And
The more you learn, the more you talk about how you're going to learn, right? That's the Yetzirah loves that. Two yeshiva guys sitting in the base medrash discussing what's the best way that we'll be able to learn or whatever. Right? That's tremendous Yitzhahara. But the Yitzhahara can't stand is when you're actually learning. And Hamor Shabbat Maximum, as long as your kavanah is good, and you want that, you're not learning just to get ideas or whatever. You're learning because you want to be a Ben Torah. You want that Torah to make an impression. And everything that you learn that you can observe, you look for a way to observe it. Right? Okay, people have the Yitzhahara, they can't be perfect. If that's your intention, then the learning will make an impression on you, and the more you learn, the more you'll become a living Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah aren't written in one day. It takes time. This pasuk, another pasuk, eventually become a whole Sefer Torah.
And how do we balance doing chesed and Torah?
First of all, there's no steering. When you're learning Torah, you're doing the biggest chesed.
But like a chesed program.
Right. So a chesed, and again, during that time, you wouldn't be learning anyway. Then I'd rather do chesed. But if during that time you could be learning, and the chesed could be done by somebody else, and it doesn't have to be done at the time that you're learning anyway, then Torah comes before the chesed. If this is a chesed that only you can do, or you wouldn't be learning during that time anyway, and you can push the chesed to the time that you're not going to be learning anyway. So if you're not going to do the chesed, you're not going to be in the base medrash. Then do the chesed. And since none of us are under Madrega, we're learning 23 hours a day, so there are times that we're not all sick in learning. Better to do chesed during that time than to listen to rock and roll or something like that. Yeah.
Why do you think that yeshivas stress out Gemara and Yin
Because the milas that I told you, especially the one that's Mechaben Daito, the Das HaMokom, Torah makes you think like God thinks. That's what Gemara is. Gemara is a thought process. It's not even so much ideas, because you could learn 10 blot and get one idea. It's back and forth and back and forth. Most of the things are not even true because you slug them up. Right? They're Havaminas. But what did you do? You sharpened your mind to think like the Ribono Shel Olam thinks. And that helps you not only with knowing the Gemara, but later on in life, when you'll have issues that come up, your thought process will be a Torah thought process in dealing with it. So, and if you learn Gemara Be'iyun, then pretty much the rest of your life you can open any sefer and learn it. But if you spend your whole time reading Torah novels or learning Chumash, you'll know how to learn Chumash, but you won't know how to learn pretty much anything else. So if you learn Gemara Be'iyun, you'll be able to learn everything. And you'll learn it in a way that you really understand it. When you open a Mishnayos, when you open a Sefer Halacha, when you open a Sefer of Musar, you learn it like a Ben Torah learns it, because you know how that thought process is. But if all you learn is Pashut the things, you'll never be able to learn deeper, and you'll never be able to learn other things that you're not accustomed to learning. If you get accustomed to learning Gemara and you master learning Gemara Be'iyun, then you can learn anything else. And you'll learn it also in a way that's also Be'iyun, which you really understand. You'll learn Chumash Be'iyun, and you'll learn Musar Be'iyun. Your whole thought process will be different. That's why it's not so much for the ideas. Because today who learns all of Shas and the Yeshiva? You learn a few blot here and a few blot there, but you condition your mind to learn Be'iyun. That'll help you the rest of your life, whatever you do. Yeah.
What should a person do if he doesn't really enjoy what he's learning?
Don't enjoy what you're learning. First of all, the more you learn and the more you get good at it, the more you'll enjoy it. People don't enjoy things they can't do. The more that you learn, you push yourself to do it, the more tamura'u, taste it, eventually you get a taste for it. Some people don't have a taste for gourmet food. They like to eat hot dogs or whatever, right? If you eat it, you get used to it, right? I don't know, I have a taste for sushi, but nice if you eat it, right? You get a taste for it. That's the first thing. The more you do it, push yourself to do it, and the better you become at it, the more you're able to like it. In addition, I heard somebody once went to Steinman and said to him he doesn't enjoy learning. He said to him, what's it called? He said to him, Steinman, you like steak? He said, what is it? What's it called? is. He said, well, that's the same way I feel about Gemara. You have no assumption what it means to enjoy a state. I don't have assumption to enjoy it. Right? I'm telling you what it is, and you're never going to, for my, enjoy the state. You know what it is. People keep telling me Gemara is interesting and it's enjoyable, and they're telling me, like I'm telling you the state. So Shana told me the following. He said, is honey sweet? Yeah, very sweet. He said, but sometimes honey can burn your mouth if you have sores on your mouth. That is not sweet at all. It's very bitter and it's painful. First you have to heal the sores on your mouth, and then you'll be able to have the sweetness of the honey. Sometimes you have to work on your midos, on your Yerushalayim, because there are sores that prevent you from seeing the sweetness of Torah. So you have to group both things together. You have to push yourself to learn and to become good at it, and then you'll be able to enjoy it. And you also have to worry, maybe there's things I have to correct that are sores that are preventing me from feeling the sweetness of Torah, because the Torah is burning me because it, to a certain degree, conflicts with things that I have to correct. Do those two things, you have a chance at least of getting at some point to realize how enjoyable Torah is.
A guy wants to dedicate his life to Torah. Which one do you think would be the better path? Learning or being a mechanic? Like being working with people?
Depends on the person. Depends what he's cut out to do. Depends what his, right? If he's not cut out to be a teacher, he has no patience, and the captain Malame, he can't work on himself or whatever. He's not the kind of person who give things over, but he can really learn for himself, and maybe he should be learning himself. He's the kind of person who could really be mashpia on other people. The halacha is, if you can be mashpia on other people, you have a chiyuv mashpia. As many people as you can be mashpia. One person, you have a chiyuv on one person. 1,000 people, you have a chiyuv on 1,000 people. So it depends on the person. Everything depends on that. If everybody should be doing the same thing, and all the bases of Torah would be covered. There's plenty of bases to be covered. There's Tayonim and Rabbanim and Mechanchim, and people who are sitting and learning what's it called, Yom V'Laylu, just sitting and learning. So everybody has a place, a tafkid to perform. And what your tafkid is depends on a lot of circumstances and a lot of your kochos hanefesh, what your abilities and capabilities are, where the function puts you. Put all those things together and get objective advice to somebody, and you'll know which path you should follow. Usually, the function pushes you to where you're supposed to be, even though you think you're choosing it in the end.
The Rebbe mentioned that Torah fine-tunes the midos, but then on the other hand, you need certain midos in order to
You need the basic midos
clean.
to learn Torah. You're not a mensch. Torah wasn't given to dogs and cats. You don't know how to act like a human being, right? Then you can't have Torah. But once you're a human being and you have Torah, you'll never get to the higher, more sophisticated levels of midos, right? Even those very basic midos, but there's much more enhanced and much more refined without Torah.
So how does one first gain those midos needed to become a kli for Torah?
So the first midos of being a ben adam, that's something that's common to all human beings, it's seichel. You have to use your seichel. And that's why it says by the Mabul, it could be, according to Ramban says, could be they didn't have mitzvahs yet. Mora says that Shem mitzvah given to Adam. It could be they didn't have Shem mitzvahs, the Ramban says. So why were they held responsible for stealing and for immorality? Because of certain things that Seichel Ha'adam is supposed to tell them, this is not the way a human being acts. And if you don't follow your Seichel, then you deserve to be punished. So there's certain things you don't even need Torah. You don't need mitzvahs. You need, the Rebbe gave people a Seichel Yosher, that if you don't distort it and corrupt it, because that's what you'd like to do, but your objective to be able to have those basic midos just from the Seichel. It says if Torah wasn't given, we could learn sneers from the cat and whatever, just in nature. There's certain things that a person knows. These are the right things to do. He knows it innately. Right? It's part of the sociological buildup of a new human being. Those are the midos that precede the Torah.
If the Rav's not in the rush, we get 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay, so 5 minutes, yeah. Yeah.
If someone's in the work field, I don't know, are they missing out on that even part? How do they deal with it? Are they supposed to be learning, trying to learn even?
Person who's working has to be kovea itim. And then, based on, first of all, his background, what he's learned until then, turn this off. What he's capable of learning, right? Then he has to ask somebody who matters him. He has to spend some time learning Musar every day, some time learning halacha, and some time learning Eid. Okay, everything else is the more time you have, the more okay, that's a different thing. But to at least continue some kind of Eid, like I said, because that gives you the ability to know how to learn all the other things that you learn. Halacha is different learning, and the Chumash is a different learning for a person who knows how to learn the depending how much background you have in that. It's just a matter of now making time to do that, or you have to still get the caleb to be able to do it. That somebody has to know how to balance it out based on the amount of time you have, what is best for you to split up that time. Basically, the person who's capable should learn a portion of the time, a good portion of the time iyun, a portion of the time halacha, a portion of the time Muslim. Anything else is extra. Yeah.
If one feels that he can either choose the path of like being supported and he has the option to do that, or he has the option to make his own parnasa and be supported to be able to learn more. And make parnasa, he'd still be able to learn, but obviously the time would probably become half or maybe more.
If he really feels that he can dedicate himself to learning, and he's not doing it because it's an easy way out, and I can make a parnasa and get supported by somebody and not have to work too hard, right? I enjoy learning, so it's a good way of making a living. But he's doing it because he wants to be dedicated to Torah, and he really feels that he can make a contribution to Klal Yisrael by sitting and learning Torah. Not being a rav or anything else, but just by contributing to Klal Yisrael more than with Torah. And he's doing it l'shem shamayim, right? And the money he's taking is in order to enable him to do that. Then if he has that option, and he can do it properly, and he will learn, right? And he'll do it with the minimal at least l'shem shamayim, not as a parnasa, then he should choose that. If he doesn't do that, he's not going to learn anyway. Right? He's not going to really, he's going to be supported, but he's not really into it. He's not really that dedicated. Except he's taking the easy way out, perhaps. That's very simple. Yeah.
All of these ideas about energy for the world and perfection. So Rav was just infant. So when Rav is learning, so he can make sense of everything. When a person's learning, and it's a pretty low level, and he breaks his teeth doing 10 lines, tomorrow with Rashi, with some art scroll, and he sort of gets it. All these things are still happening the same way.
Echad Amar Be'Echad Rav Yosef, Zeichat Tzadik B'Vracha, he learned, or whatever, Avadi had a tremendous thing. It could be that somebody who puts in tremendous Mesiras Nefesh, right? Because your peers, not everybody sitting in the Tivar are learning. Many of your friends or whatever are enjoying themselves, doing other things, right? So you've sacrificed just to be here, okay? Came to a serious place of learning, right? You could have gone to some place where you came for a year in Eretz Israel and had a good time. Not that you have a good time here. The good time here is the real good time. So you chose, first of all, sacrifice the Talmud Torah. And it's not easy. You're breaking your head over 10 lines of Gemara that maybe you understand a little bit of what you did, but you're putting your head into it, right? So that is on the same par as what about Yosef. Because it's not the result, it's how much effort you're putting in. And the effort you're putting in and the sacrifice you're putting in will be on par with somebody else who, to him, it's not too much of a sacrifice, and it's whatever. Maybe he'll get the scar for the sacrifice he put in when he was a youngster, for plenty of sacrifice. Now it's not like that. But you never know, right, which word of Torah is more significant, right? From a Gadol Israel could be your word is just as significant.
Hatzlacha, Rabbi.